I'm about to tell you the secret Hollywood tried to bury for over 50 years, the final truth Lee Marvin confessed before he died, a truth that could change the way you see Clint Eastwood forever. I traced it back to the forests of Oregon in 1968, where a film meant to be a masterpiece collapsed into chaos, scandal, and silence so thick it swallowed everyone involved. And I promise you this, by the end of this story, you'll understand why Marvin said the world never heard the real truth about Clint Eastwood. There is a moment in every legend's life when the truth stops hiding, and mine begins with a childhood that looked perfect only from far away. I grew up inside a polished New York home, the kind of place where my father wrote crisp advertising lines by day and my mother stitched stories about fashion by night. From the outside, it all seemed calm, organized, and safe, but the calm never matched what lived inside me. I was not built for quiet. I was not built for rules. I was not even built for the kind of classrooms that expected a boy to sit still and repeat what he read. Every day felt like a test I never studied for, and my rebellion was the only language I understood. I skipped classes without guilt, fought anyone who pushed me, and watched teachers give up on me one after another. They thought I was lazy. They thought I was reckless. They never guessed the truth hiding under the noise. Years later, doctors would put names to the battles that shaped me. Dyslexia. ADHD. Words that explained why letters jumped when I tried to read them, why my mind sped ahead even when my body stayed chained to a desk. School was not a place for me. It was a battlefield disguised as a hallway. Every assignment felt like a trap. Every hour felt like a sentence I had to survive. Yet even in that daily war, something softer fought to stay alive. I found a violin. Or maybe it found me. The thin wooden body, the quiet strings, the way sound trembled before it grew strong. It was the most unlikely companion a bruised, restless kid could choose, but I clung to it anyway. And then, as if the universe wanted to remind me of the other half of who I was, I discovered hunting. One day I drifted inside the fragile world of music, the next I moved through the forest with adrenaline burning in my blood. 2 rhythms. 2 instincts. 2 versions of me inside one body that never agreed on what it wanted. No one should be surprised that school eventually pushed me out. Or maybe I pushed myself out first. I bounced between programs, strategies, and promises I could not keep. Each new beginning ended with the same truth: I was not made for desks, chalk, or carefully drawn futures. I needed a different war. And the world, impatient and unforgiving, was preparing one for me. When 1942 arrived, it carried the sound of marching boots and the weight of a planet on fire. I did not hesitate. I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps without thinking twice. I wanted purpose. I wanted clarity. I wanted a place where chaos made sense. The island of Saipan gave me all 3 in the most brutal way imaginable. Combat stripped away every illusion I had about strength. Machine gun fire tore through my unit like metal rain. Friends fell faster than I could count. The only reason I survived was luck wrapped around a stubborn will that refused to snap. A burst of bullets slammed into my lower back and hips, tearing through me with enough force to steal the breath from my lungs. For a moment I thought my story ended there, on a stretch of sand too far from home for anyone to hear my name. But I lived. Barely. And the purple heart pinned to my chest later was only a symbol of what my body never forgot. When I returned to America, people called me a hero. What they did not say was that heroes still needed work. Heroes still needed food. Heroes could still be broke. My first job was as a plumber's assistant, bent over pipes and covered in grease while the memory of Saipan throbbed quietly beneath my skin. It was a far fall from the battlefield to the basement, but maybe I needed that fall to understand what came next. One night, inside a tiny community theater, an actor collapsed and someone asked for a volunteer. I stepped forward before I could think. I walked onto that stage with no training, no preparation, and no idea why my chest suddenly felt alive. The lights burned hot. The audience waited. And something inside me clicked into place. Acting did not ask me to sit still. Acting did not punish my restless mind. Acting asked me to feel, to move, to become. It was the first time since childhood that I felt like the world had left a door open just for me. I chased that door until it led me to Off-Broadway, then to Broadway, and finally to Hollywood, a place where a man like me could crash, burn, rise, and burn again. And if you think the chaos of my early years ended there, you have no idea what waited for me on the other side of fame. I wonder what people will say after hearing this, and I wonder who is ready for the darker turn my story takes in the next chapter. If you want more stories like this, stay close and follow along, because what happened next in my life is where the chaos truly began. There is a moment when a man realizes his talent can save him or destroy him, and I learned that truth faster than anyone expected. My earliest roles were hardly worth mentioning on paper, the kind of tiny background parts that disappeared in the credits before anyone had time to read them, but they carried something no acting school could teach. I had held real weapons. I had seen real fear. I knew what it felt like when danger breathed against the back of my neck, and that authenticity bled into every frame I touched. Directors wanted grit. I gave them grit. They wanted menace. I gave them the echoes of Saipan. People sensed the truth, even when they didn't know what they were sensing. My climb from nameless shadow to recognizable presence came faster than I expected. The big heat carved a path for me, letting me bring a cruelty to the screen that startled audiences. Then the wild one pushed me deeper into the world of outsiders, and I trained on motorcycles until the machine felt like a second spine. Hollywood began whispering my name, not with admiration, but with curiosity, the way you watch a lit match rolling too close to a curtain. In the middle of that rise, I did something ordinary men do every day. I got married. Betty Ebling and I began a family, and soon there were 4 children in our home, laughter spilling through rooms I never believed I would settle into. But even then I was living 2 lives. Somewhere between sets, I crossed paths with Anne Braftoft. What began as quiet fascination turned into a secret affair that stretched itself across months and miles. I told myself the contradiction made sense, that a man could love stability yet chase fire just to feel alive. Hollywood, as always, demanded more than I had to give. I pushed until the floor cracked beneath me, and then television reached down like a rope. M Squad handed me a badge, a gun, and the spotlight. For the first time, I stood at the center instead of the edges. Week after week, episode after episode, I led the show with a sharpness people had never seen from me. It felt like the beginning of an entirely new life. But the applause faded faster than I was ready for. When the series ended, silence filled the space it left behind. A year passed without work. Depression curled around my ribs like a fist, squeezing tighter every time I woke. I had climbed high enough to taste stardom, and now I was sinking with no rope, no hand, no promise of another chance. Then John Wayne stepped in. The Duke did not need to rescue anyone, least of all a man like me, but he saw something raw beneath the wreckage. The Comancheros gave me back my footing, and Liberty Valance gave me teeth. Sharing a frame with John Wayne and James Stewart could have swallowed me whole, but instead it steadied me. I learned how to fill silence without shouting, how to let danger simmer in my eyes rather than explode in my hands. People finally looked at me and saw more than a bruiser. They saw a force building toward something larger. That something arrived with the killers. For the first time, my name stood alone at the top. I was not a shadow. I was the headline. And Hollywood finally understood what I could become. With new power comes new storms. Cat Ballou was a comedy, light on the surface, but behind the camera it tore open every weakness I tried to hide. Jane Fonda kept her distance from me, and I do not blame her. I drank too much, too often. I misjudged my own energy. I crashed into moments that needed gentleness. When her fiancé, Roger Vadim, arrived on set, I let my impulses speak for me. Insults slipped from my mouth before I could reel them back, the kind of drunken bravado that leaves a stain long after it fades from memory. Yet here is the cruel irony that shaped my entire life. The film that exposed my faults also delivered my greatest triumph. Cat Ballou handed me the Academy Award I never expected to touch. I stood on that stage holding the golden statue, feeling the weight of a future I had barely dared to imagine. From that point on, my career did not rise. It detonated. People called it my era of total power, and for a while, I believed them. But power is its own kind of wildfire, and once it spreads, it becomes impossible to control. I wonder how many people today understand what it cost me to climb that high, and how quickly everything around me would begin to crack under the pressure of the life I built. Tell me what moment in this part of the story surprised you the most, and stay with me, because the next chapter reveals how my greatest victories set the stage for my greatest mistakes. I learned the hardest lesson of my career the day I realized a man can stand at his highest point and still be walking straight toward his downfall. The Dirty Dozen made me larger than life, a symbol of grit and command, the kind of figure audiences trusted to lead them into danger and drag them back out. When I walked onto that set, I felt something click inside me, something sharp and undeniable. The role fit me like a scar fits the skin that healed around it. By the time the film reached theaters, the world had decided who I was, a leader, a fighter, a man carved from iron. Success should have steadied me, but instead it blurred my judgment. Studios started offering me scripts, roles, promises of greatness, and I believed I deserved every inch of it. That belief was the beginning of the quiet unraveling no one saw coming. When Sam Peckinpah sent me the script for The Wild Bunch, I felt the weight of potential before I even opened the cover. It was violent, ambitious, and unlike anything Hollywood had tried before. People said it would change the genre forever. They were right. And I walked away from it. I did not turn it down because I thought it was weak. I turned it down because the money was not high enough. My pride told me I was worth more. My ego whispered that I had earned the right to demand more. The Wild Bunch moved on without me, and history stamped my absence into its legacy. It became a masterpiece, and I became the man who could have been part of it. Then came the offer that sealed my fate, Paint Your Wagon. A musical. A full-blown, big-budget, unpredictable musical. I was a man known for gunfights and grit, yet suddenly I was negotiating notes I could not reach and rhythms I barely understood. The paycheck was enormous, the kind that makes any hesitation go quiet. I convinced myself it was a bold move, a chance to stretch, a way to chase something new. Instead, it stretched me thin. I stood on that mountain set singing Wanderin' Star with a voice that drifted like gravel in the wind, and against all logic, the song became a hit. The roughness that critics mocked somehow resonated with the public. It was one of the strangest contradictions of my life. I had left behind a legendary Western to join a musical that nearly collapsed under its own weight, and yet the one thing I never expected to succeed became the only part of the film people still talk about. But success in one corner could not hide the damage spreading everywhere else. The drinking that once made me fearless now made me reckless. My body needed it, my anger fed on it, and my work suffered under it. Colleagues felt the shift. Directors hesitated. Co-stars kept their distance. During the filming of Point Blank, I looked at John Vernon and decided he did not seem tough enough for the world we were building on screen. Instead of adjusting my performance, I let my fist do the work. I hit him. Hard. All in the name of realism, I told myself, as if that justified anything. These moments stacked themselves into a pattern, a truth I refused to face. I was no longer the man shaped by combat and survival. I was becoming the man shaped by ego and habit. After 1970, my career no longer climbed. It staggered, lurched, then faltered. Another chance arrived, the kind that could have pulled me back into the center of the spotlight. Director John Boorman wanted me for Deliverance, a tense backwoods thriller that would later define an entire era of cinema. I read the script and felt the tension in every line. But I told him I was too old. I told him the role demanded younger men. Maybe that was true, or maybe it was fear, or exhaustion, or pride dressed as humility. Whatever the reason, I stepped aside. The film went on without me and became another classic, another echo of what my career might have been. That is the part people do not understand about success. The higher you climb, the more dangerous your decisions become. One wrong turn can cost you a film. 2 wrong turns can cost you a decade. And eventually, the pattern becomes a mirror you try not to look into. Money, ego, and impulse-guided choices that should have been shaped by instinct and craft. Instead of strengthening my position, each misstep pushed me further from the center of the world that once treated me like a king. I watched myself drift, sometimes slowly, sometimes abruptly, like a man walking backward through his own legend. Looking back, I often wonder which loss cut the deepest, the roles I refused, the roles I accepted, or the parts of myself I let slip through my hands without realizing how hard they would be to reclaim. Let me know which decision surprised you most, and stay with me, because the next chapter reveals how my personal life unraveled even faster than my career. There is a truth so heavy it can follow a man across decades, and mine began with a secret I thought I had buried forever until it clawed its way back into the light. I spent many years trying to balance the life I lived in public with the life I kept hidden in the shadows, but the two eventually collided, and when they did, the impact cracked open every lie I ever told myself. Ola entered my world when I was already drifting between victories and disasters, and she steadied me in ways I barely deserved. Michelle Triola, the woman everyone later called Ola, had a voice, a stage presence, and a future that could have carried her far, but she set it all aside to follow me. She traveled with me, waited for me, kept my home, and held the pieces of my life together even when I was too careless to notice. She wanted a family with me. She believed we could build something lasting. But life with me never offered safety. She became pregnant 3 different times during our years together, and each experience ended in heartbreak. 1 miscarriage. 2 terminations that I paid for because I feared commitment more than I feared the consequences. Those choices left a permanent mark on her body and mind, and on the day the truth surfaced in a courtroom, I felt the weight of what could never be undone. By the end of it all, she could no longer have children. That loss belonged to her, and whether I wanted it or not, it belonged to me as well. Yet the worst part of our story did not begin with Ola. It began far earlier, back when I was a young man trying to outrun the noise of my own impulses. In 1945, I was involved with a girl named Pamela Feely. She was only 17, still caught between childhood and adulthood, and she became pregnant. I panicked. I pushed her into an illegal procedure because I was afraid of responsibility, afraid of scandal, and afraid of being anchored before I had even begun my life. The abortion nearly killed her. I saw the fear in her eyes, the confusion, the betrayal, and then I ran. I told her I would be gone for 1 summer and come back. I never returned. For decades I pretended that chapter no longer existed, but the truth never disappears. It waits. It circles. And eventually it knocks on the door you least expect to open. Nearly 25 years later, without warning and without logic, I walked back into Pamela's life. I stepped into her kitchen like a ghost returning to the only unfinished story he had left behind. I told her I came back for her, that I wanted to build a future with her, that after all these years, she was the one I had been running toward instead of away from. She believed me. She let me in. And in that moment, I convinced myself that the past could be rewritten. But there was a problem. That problem was Ola, still waiting in California, still believing we were building a life together, still holding on to the promises I had whispered to her in the quiet hours. I told her I planned to marry Pamela. She did not break. She did not collapse. She did something far stronger. She fought. She filed a lawsuit that changed Hollywood forever. Marvin versus Marvin. The first great battle over what people would come to call palimony, the idea that a partner in a long-term relationship could claim rights even without a marriage license. The moment the case was filed, my life split into 2 impossible halves. In court, Ola revealed everything. The pregnancies. The miscarriage. The procedures that left her unable to have children. The years she gave up her dreams to support mine. And the sentence that became the heart of the trial, a line I had spoken early in our relationship when I believed emotion was the same as commitment. What I have is yours, and what you have is mine. Those words rose above every legal argument like a bell no one could unring. When the verdict arrived, no one truly won. The court awarded Ola a single payment, far smaller than what she sought, but symbolically enormous. She claimed it as a victory for women who had given their lives to men who never gave them a ring. I claimed it as proof that emotional promises could not be turned into financial debts. The truth sat somewhere in between. The world watched. The law shifted. And the shadow of that courtroom followed me into every year that remained. Even after the trial ended, I carried the sense that I had become a man forever judged by the women who trusted me and the choices I had been too weak to face. Pamela became my wife. Ola found her peace with someone else. But the echo of everything that happened lingered long after the final gavel struck. Some stories fall apart quietly. Mine tore open in front of cameras, reporters, and headlines that spoke of scandal, betrayal, and responsibility I could not escape. I often wonder what people think when they hear these parts of my life, and I wonder which truth feels the heaviest to them. Tell me what part of this chapter hit you the hardest, and stay with me, because the next part exposes how my career and health began to collapse under the weight of everything I tried to outrun. There is a moment when a man realizes the life he built is collapsing faster than he can hold it together, and mine arrived with a truth I could no longer outrun. I married Pamela believing stability would silence the restlessness inside me, but the cycle returned as if nothing had changed. I drank on the way to set, I drank after the final shot, and I drank through the hours between, convincing myself that the blur made me stronger instead of weaker. When I joined the cast of The Big Red One, the crew expected my usual rough greeting, something loud or unpredictable, but I gave them silence instead. I stepped into the room without a word, without a handshake, without even a glance. Later, during a car ride with my co-stars, I broke that silence by asking which one of them was Carradine. When he raised his hand, I hit him with a single profanity and then fell quiet again. It was strange, sharp, and awkward, and even I could not explain why I acted that way. It felt as if my instincts were misfiring, as if something inside me was slipping out of alignment. The slide continued. During Gorky Park, I showed up so drunk that the production could not even begin. They sent me to the hospital, and instead of shutting down the film or replacing me, the director walked into my room with the script in his hand. He rehearsed my scenes beside the bed, reading lines to a man attached to tubes and monitors. It was loyalty mixed with desperation, and it reminded me how far my reputation had fallen. Then came an unexpected triumph. Dog Day demanded discipline, and somehow I found it. I stayed sober through every day of the shoot, one long stretch of clarity that felt almost miraculous. But the moment the cameras stopped, I slipped again. The bottle waited for me like an old friend, and I reached for it without hesitation. My temper followed close behind. One night, drunk and reckless, I punched a police officer. The next morning, drowning in remorse, I walked into the hospital with a bouquet of flowers to apologize. That was who I had become. A man who caused chaos in the dark and chased forgiveness in the daylight. Hollywood noticed the changes, and the audience noticed them too. When I returned for Dirty Dozen, Next Mission, the story claimed only a few months had passed since the original, but nearly 2 decades separated the films. Viewers saw what I tried to ignore. I looked older, slower, heavier, as if my body had absorbed every mistake I ever made and refused to let any of them go. My final major appearance came with the Delta Force. On the page, it should have been a return to form, a tough military role that echoed the kind of characters I once embodied with ease. But on the screen, the truth was impossible to hide. I looked exhausted. I looked fragile. I looked like a man far older than his years. For the first time, I could see the audience realizing it too. My health deteriorated quickly after that. The stomach pain that haunted me for years sharpened into something unbearable. Doctors discovered the inflammation in my colon, and surgery offered hope, but hope does not always hold. They removed part of my intestine in a procedure meant to save me, yet my heart failed soon afterward. At 63 years old, my story reached its final frame. I often think about how people interpret these last chapters of my life, and I wonder what truths they see between the lines I could not control. Stay with me, because the final part reveals the confession that tied my legacy to Clint Eastwood forever. There is a truth buried inside the ruins of that film, a truth so volatile that I spent years wondering if anyone would believe it once I finally said it aloud. Paint Your Wagon was supposed to be a grand experiment, but behind the curtain it became a storm that stripped every one of us down to the bone. I remember the first time I saw the Oregon wilderness that would swallow the production whole. The mountains rose like walls, the winds cut through clothing, and the only way to move people or equipment across the terrain was by helicopter. Every flight felt like a gamble with gravity. Every landing reminded us how far we were from the safety of a studio. Money burned faster than gasoline. With each passing week, the budget stretched like a rope pulled to its final thread. Then came the decision to build an entire town from scratch, not a facade or a cheat, but a fully constructed settlement balanced on hydraulic lifts so it could collapse on command. The scale was so ambitious that it almost dared the world to prove it impossible. Workers hammered through days of blistering heat, nights of aching cold, and storms that rolled in with no warning. Rain drowned equipment. Heat warped wood. Snow fell when no one expected it. And the tunnels beneath the set collapsed more than once, shaking the ground below our feet like a warning none of us wanted to hear. Control slipped even further when Alan Lerner seized authority in the editing room from Joshua Logan. The director who had suffered through every miserable day on that mountain suddenly found his film reshaped by another hand. Tempers cracked. Trust evaporated. Whatever unity had survived the shoot crumbled in post-production. But the chaos around us was nothing compared to the chaos inside Clint Eastwood's life, the part no one outside the film truly understood. I watched him fall into something far more dangerous than a runaway production. It began with his affair with Jean Seberg. She was luminous, fragile in ways she tried hard to hide, and she believed Clint was her escape from a marriage already fraying at the edges. When she confided in me, she spoke like someone stepping out of a cage into sunlight for the first time. She was ready to leave her husband. She thought Clint would stand beside her. Her husband reacted with a fury so sharp it could cut air. He challenged Clint to a duel. A real one. With real consequences. The madness of it still rattles in my memory. But what Jean never knew was that Clint was already involved with another woman on the same set, a young extra he had personally helped hire. That second affair lived underneath the first, hidden, quiet, and cruel in the way only secrets can be. I saw the cracks forming long before Jean did. When filming ended, Clint disappeared from her life with a silence that echoed louder than any goodbye. She waited for closure that never came. The heartbreak shadowed her for years, and watching it unfold made me realize how far Clint had wandered from the image audiences adored. The rest of the production did not fare any better. The locals hired as extras camped near the set for meager pay until they decided they had endured enough. They threatened to strike unless they received a small raise, and the production scrambled to keep them on board. Even an Oregon senator showed up in costume, drawn to the spectacle like everyone else, unaware he was stepping into a slow-moving disaster. Helicopter pilots risked their lives daily. Crew members slept in exhaustion. Logan, already worn thin by Lerner's interference, pushed through each dawn with nothing but a thread of willpower holding him together. By the time filming wrapped, the production felt less like a film and more like the aftermath of a war we somehow survived by accident. The movie failed the moment it reached theaters. The budget ballooned beyond anything reasonable, and the box office could not catch it. Critics shredded it with a kind of vicious delight, and audiences drifted away with indifference. It is difficult to describe how it feels to watch a project collapse that thoroughly, especially when you know how much sweat and sanity were sacrificed to drag it into existence. But my final confession is not about the film. It is about Clint. Near the end of my life, when the noise around my career had settled into memory, I finally admitted what I saw in him during those months in the wilderness. Clint was overwhelmed in ways he never dared show the world. He was torn between the men he wanted to be and the men he had already become. The affairs were not triumphs of desire. They were symptoms of a deeper confusion, a fracture he hid behind silence and stoic eyes. People believed Clint was the quiet hero, the man of iron will and steady judgment. But on that set, he was lost. Truly lost. His stillness was not strength. It was a shield he pressed against his own spiraling emotions. Outwardly he looked composed, but inside he was unraveling faster than any of us could see until it was too late. He struggled to anchor himself in a world shifting beneath his feet, and the film became the reflection of that inner turmoil. That is the truth I carried with me. The chaos of Paint Your Wagon was not just a production failure. It was the mirror of the lives we were living behind the scenes. The town collapsed on hydraulic lifts, but our lives collapsed in ways no machine could predict. Clint's heartbreaks. Jean's despair. Logan's exhaustion. My own unraveling in slow motion. Paint Your Wagon fell apart because the people making it were falling apart too. I often wonder how audiences interpret that disaster now, and what lesson they see in the ruins of that film and the lives tangled inside it. If something in this final chapter struck you, tell me what truth you think mattered most, and let this story remind you that no amount of fame can hide the storms a man carries inside.